How y'all doing? It's Gary, the guy in the pink shirt. Thanks so much for joining us on this video. If you're here live or watching it recorded, either way. I am the guy in the pink shirt. I even apparently have a Gary in a pink suit, thanks to Eric Johnston Photography. If you haven't met me yet, boy, I'd love to meet you. We actually have a contest, find the guy in the pink shirt, and you get a free set of videos. So if you see me out in public, I'm the only guy in pink, just walk up and say hi. If you haven't met me in person, I will tell you I actually do look reasonably smart on paper. I have over 7,800 hours as an airline transport pilot, and I am actually a double master flight, instrument, and multi-engine instructor. Less than 800 instructors out of the 112,000 have ever been given a master. I'm one of a few to be given a master both by NAFI and SAFE. And the only reason I seem reasonably smart and am actually really good at single pilot IFR, Avidyne, Garmin, ForeFlight, and autopilots, it's because it's my full-time job, and that's all I do every single day is I travel all over the world and provide private 3-day courses in people's airplanes. So if I go really fast tonight and I seem good at ForeFlight, I have no doubt that you're good at your full-time job. I'm just lucky enough to get paid to teach it every day. So if you'd like me to come out and spend 3 days in your airplane anywhere in the world, that's kind of what I do. And I was very honored to be awarded the 2019 FAA National Instructor of the Year last year. So thanks for the award. So I like to tell people I'm the greatest instructor on the planet. It doesn't mean that I'm great. It doesn't mean that I'm a great instructor. It just means I've made all of the mistakes for you first. So I have really cool stories to tell so you don't make the same mistakes I've already done for you. So your iPad's expensive, and I get that. And I tell people over and over and over, don't fly when you're tired. Don't fly when you're stressed out by family. And don't ever, under any circumstances, look at an iPad while you're taxiing. Remember, greatest instructor ever, Gary, it's because I did this mistake already. So I got home late from a vacation, got up very early the next morning, and I'm not really a morning person. My family is texting me and telling me in person, we gotta go, the party can't start without you. That's not true. So I was supposed to fly from Decatur, Texas up to Tulsa. And as I was taxiing, my very expensive iPad slipped out of the new holder and fell. And I looked down to grab it and immediately felt a thunk as my wing taxied directly into a very bright yellow pole directly over the fuel pumps. So my $1,000 iPad didn't come close to the $3,000 dent repair in my wing. Now I happen to be insured by the best insurance company, in my opinion, of EMCO. You actually get discounts for doing wings credit classes. They actually give a 10% discount to anybody that takes one of my 3-day mastery programs. They believe in education, and I didn't even report this, but EMCO saw my write-up on, hey, I'm an idiot and look what I did, please don't do it. And they said, well, you know, who do we send the check to? And I'm like, nobody. I'm going to pay for this one out of my pocket. And the reason I wanted to take the money out of my pocket is to drive it home in my little thick head. Do not look down at your iPad while you're taxiing. All right, on with the class. If you have a question at any time, please use the questions feature. I will try and get to as many as I can. If I can't get to them, I'll try and answer them offline. All right, so let's get back to where I was. So one of the most common problems people have with ForeFlight is they don't set up their ICAO correctly. And if you don't do ICAO setup correctly, when you try and fly RNAV, SIDS, or stars, it will actually reject it. So I'm going to go pretty quick, and I'm going to show you how I set up my airplane. If you're anywhere in the North Texas area, Eric Johnston, my photographer, does amazing work. As you can see, that's my 1966 U-206. I have the most advanced flight management systems out there. I have an IFD 550 and an IFD from 440 from Avidyne. I have an Avidyne remote transponder that's an extended squitter with 1080 ADS-B out. Now, what doesn't count in my ADS-B setup is the Skytrax 978 in. You only put on the ICAO setup stuff that's out and in, or just out. You don't put stuff that's in only, and I'll show you that. Other really cool equipment on my airplane is a Genesis S-Tech 55X autopilot, which makes my life really easy, an Aspen PFD, Aero LEDs, and a really cool heads-up display from Epic Optics. It's just none of that actually matters on the ICAO setup. So I'm on the maps page on my iPad, and if I just touch more in the bottom right corner, and then aircraft, you'll see my airplane, and it's missing a lot. FAA slant Gulf, but it's missing a bunch. So under ICAO equipment, I'm WAS because I can do LPV approaches. I'm Gulf. You don't need to check Lima, even if you have an ILS, just leave it blank. You don't need to check Oscar, just leave it blank. Because Sierra will include the VOR, the radio, and the ILS. You do need to make sure you get that Romeo, and you do need to make sure you get the Yankee. Just because we don't use it in the US doesn't mean you don't need it if you go internationally. Under surveillance, I'm a Bravo 1, 1090 out. And I know my transponder is mode Charlie, but the correct is Echo. Don't just do the minimums. Do everything you do have, even if you're not using it right now. Under ICAO performance-based nav, we have to do everything that says GPS, or ICAO calls it GNSS. So it's Bravo 2, Charlie 2, Delta 2, Oscar 2, and Sierra 1. I can do RNP approaches and RNAV, SIDS, and stars. I'm just not RNP approach with Barrow, AR approach with radius to fixed legs, or AR approach no radius fix. So make sure if you have GPS that you do Sierra 1. Then under other information, you have to put in your code. Where do I get that code? Well, pretty simple. Go over to FAA.gov, type in my tail number, 4941 Foxtrot, hit go, and zoom in, look at the mode S code base 16. That's where I got that code, and it is printed on your registration as well. So touch other information, make sure that code is put in. Under nav, we need to tell them that we have WAS, which ICAO calls Space-Based Augmentation System. I'm a performance level alpha. And under surveillance, I have 1090 out, which is 282 Bravo. And you can put extra stuff in if you want. Under registration, you can add your tail number if you want. So we could put that as November 4941 Foxtrot, but make sure you at least have all of the rest filled out as I've shown. Now I can get RNAV, SIDS, and stars. One of the greatest things about ForeFlight is the ability to mark up charts. So I'm going to talk about tonight a lot of differences between professional pilots and amateur pilots. A professional pilot spends way more time preparing for the flight than actually in flight. So I want to mark up my charts. So if I asked you all, what's the biggest killer of pilots? Everybody that's on the live webinar at least, use the question feature and type in what do you think the biggest killer of pilots are? What are some of the common causes that kill pilots? And I'm going to wait just a second for some answers to come in. And I'm getting some really great answers. Scott says inadvertent flight into terrain. Hunter, human error. Hunter, you're going to be close to the winner on this. Paul, Mark, CFIT, loss of control, distracted CFIT, weather, poor prep, lack of prep. Okay, you guys all gave some really good answers that aren't quite it. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is what I think is truly the biggest killer of pilots that actually leads to all of the answers you gave. All of your answers are correct, but that's not what causes the death. What causes the death is what causes them to get into CFIT, loss of control, stall spin, and all that other stuff. The biggest killer of pilots is something called decision fatigue. And decision fatigue, which is a million medical studies, works like this. The quality of your decisions decreases, or you make worse decisions based on a couple of things. How long you've been making decisions, how many decisions you've made, and how fast you make them, and how much stress you're under when you make them. So anything we can do to reduce workload in flight, like marking up our charts, planning correctly, and using autopilots and never hand flying, except for training. Autopilots always make you safer as long as you know how to work them because it reduces the number of your decisions. All of your answers, everybody, were great. They were 100% right, but it was decision fatigue that got them there. So let me show you how to reduce your workload and decision fatigue by marking up your instrument approach charts. So I'm going to go to Decatur, and I'm going to mark up the RNAV 17, which is an LPV approach with a decision altitude. So I consider it like a precision, so I go Gary Pink. KLUD, Decatur, Texas, RNAV GPS 17. I have to have an AWOS before I can accept an approach clearance from regional before they kick me over to common traffic. Then I'm going to look at the notes. Final approach course 163. My minimum altitude outside Tinley is at or above 3,400. My decision altitude is 1297 that's published. And then in the other notes, only one of them actually affects me, and that's pilot controlled lighting because of the way I mark up the charts. We've got two initials, Zoom key or Zumkey, depending on who's working regional, buoy, and we have an intermediate fix of Wiser. Now the final approach fix, if I was doing this as LNAV, not LPV, would be Tinley. And I still like to put a big T over the final approach fix because it reminds me time, turn, twist, throttle, talk, all that good stuff. 163, and then I'm going to do the approach at 110 knots. So I'm going to highlight both 100 and 120 to get my descent rate to stay on the glide path and my published DA of 1297. Now I'm color coded, and a professional pilot in my world always assumes we're going missed. We never assume we're landing. So I color code all missed approaches in green because I've been taught since I was a kid with a car that green means go. Climb to 2600 direct Hergo. I'm going to highlight my inbound or holding course to Hergo, and I'm going to highlight the missed approach point, which triggers my Avidyne to auto sequence and provide guidance. Then my missed approach is climb 2600 Hergo, and if I get totally lost, I don't care, just get above 4,000. Then I'm going to put in some numbers because I don't want to have to read little numbers in a moving airplane. Anywhere outside of Wiser, I should be at or above 3,400. Anywhere between Wiser and Tinley, I'm going to intercept the glide path at or above 3,400. Now you notice that kind of blocks that obstacle. You can always just shrink it through the inspector, just change it to a smaller font. And then I'm going to put in my decision altitude. Now published is 1297. My personal minimums, and I do this for a living, I always round up and add 100. I'm going to decide to go missed at 1400. That upgraded or personal minimum actually allows me to use a different altimeter setting without changing it, allows for temporary cranes, and it just makes you safer. If I decide to go missed, I'm going to climb to 2600. And then I want to know how I'm going to enter the hold at Hergo before I get there. You never want to figure out how to enter hold while you're flying. That's really high workload. I'm going to do a teardrop with now it's going to be a right turn to 190, which is about 25 degrees towards my outbound course. Just drag the text box over, make me a little bit more room. And then you can even use a pencil and draw in a little arrow. Now look, I've got an Avidyne with an S-Tech autopilot. It never suspends, it auto sequences, it's always going to do the hold just fine on its own. It might decide to do a parallel entry, but if I'm hand flying at this angle, I just think a teardrop's easier. So then all you got to do is forward this to the map. And then as you're flying, your little blue airplane will be next to the altitude you should be at. And you don't have to look down at the profile. You don't have to look for your decision altitude. You don't have to look for missed approach instructions because you've already done everything. So I actually do mark up Jeppesen plates on ForeFlight. Then I print the Jeppesen plates and I mark them up again by hand. It's not that I really need paper charts. Look, I got charts on the Avidyne. I got charts on ForeFlight. I have charts in the Avidyne IFD 100 app. I have charts on my phone, but I still like paper charts because anything you write down, and if I write down all the altitudes on ForeFlight and then I rewrite the altitudes on the paper chart, anything you write down twice stores in memory much more effectively than just looking at the answers once. So by marking up your charts, you're getting prepared. The silliest thing I ever heard was I was flying along in a Premier jet, and I didn't have time to get type rated. Only got to fly it a couple times before the owner sold it. But the guy flying the Premier jet said, "Hey, we're almost there. We should look at the charts." I'm like, dude, looked at the charts a week ago. You really need to get all this stuff done before you get there. Think about your instrument rating check ride. How many of you remember your instrument rating check ride, or if you're getting ready for a check ride? Trying to figure out a hold entry after a missed approach while you're flying is darn near impossible and certainly less safe than knowing it all before you ever go. And here's a special pro tip just for you all. 2 equals 2. If we look at our friends at Denton, hi Denton, the top chart is either an ILS or a localizer runway. They're not the same approach. An ILS is one approach, a localizer is not. ILS I would do in pink because it has a decision altitude, it's a precision approach. A localizer I would do in yellow to warn me to level off, disconnect the autopilot, add power, and fly forward until timer or missed approach point appears. Well, that's the really cool thing about having Jeppesen plates is now I have 2 sets of plates. I have both Jeppesen and FAA, and I can mark them up as separate true approaches. So there's the JEP ILS runway 18, and there's the FAA localizer 18. And you can see I've truly marked them up as distinct separate approaches. Let's do some quick flight planning. So let's go from Decatur up to Oklahoma City. And the easiest way to do it is just start all in the search box and put it all up there all at once. So the top right has a search box with an X. I'm going to touch that. Just type in KLUD space KOKC space. I want to go at 6,000 feet space, and I want to leave in an hour and a half or plus 90 minutes. Enter. Now, I don't put any SIDS or stars or departure things in there yet because I want to look at the nav log and notice that GPS center to GPS center is slightly west. If I start putting in fuzz, Blico, and the arrivals, it would look like I'm going east. So you always pick your route of flight or your altitudes of flight based on magnetic heading, center of airport to center. And there's my alternate. I always pick an alternate halfway through. So remember decision fatigue. If you put your alternate after you've already gone missed in bad weather, you are tired and stressed, it doesn't work out well. If you pick your alternate before you get into bad weather, it works out much better. So which runway am I going to depart at Decatur? Well, if I look at the current METAR, it says the wind's 080 at 6. If I look at a TAF, 130 at 9, 130 at 9, 160 at 10. If I look at a Moss, 130 at 10, 140 at 9. Well, okay, so if I hit the taxiway button on Decatur up at the top right, looks like I'm going to depart runway 17, which is good because there's a published obstacle departure off runway 17, and it is not legal to depart runway 35 into IMC conditions. So now I'm going to look up Oklahoma City and look at the current METAR. And it's 130 at 9 knots, 2 miles, light drizzle, baby rain, mist, overcast at 600, and the temperature and dew point are the same. If I look at the TAF, 130, 150, 140, the winds are really favoring runway 13. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my departure out of here, which is always intercept the fuzz 360 radial to Blico. That's just what regional is going to give me every time. Then I'm going to pick the arrival. You should always use an arrival and a departure if one's available. And you see I'm going to intercept that leg. I'm not actually going to fuzz. So I'm going to load the arrival at Oklahoma City, and I want to use runway 13. So if I use the Tisdale, starting at like Fidget, it's pretty close to my route, I'm going to pick runway 17 right, because that is closest to the runway 13. And I know that from experience, but I'll show you how you can find it out. If you simply touch KOKC and put show airport diagram, the closest runway to runway 13 is 17 right. So if an arrival doesn't specifically list the runway you want, you just pick the arrival transition that's closest to it, which will get you close to AAR, which has a great crew car and, you know, good people. All right. So if I zoom out, look at that balloon line from Isaki that's dashed. It's a manual termination, and we're going to talk a lot about it coming up. And the beauty of jet plates is you can overlay a georeference chart. So after Isaki, you're not supposed to go direct to Oklahoma City. That dashed line is a manual termination or radar vector. So if we circle the transition for 17 left and right, and including in this case runway 13, it says at the bottom, after Isaki track 356, expect radar vectors to final. Let's go ahead and send it over to flights. Add my alternate of KADM and add it as an alternate. Now, if I look at the route advisor from ForeFlight, the recommended and airway are not actually recommended. It's not preferred. Air traffic control doesn't say that's better. Air traffic control in almost all parts of the country prefers GPS direct to the beginning of a star or an instrument approach, but you should always use SIDS and stars. So the route advisor in ForeFlight is a great tool, but it's not always the most efficient route, and it may not even be something you want to do. So always pick your own routes. If you're struggling for ideas, it may give you starts. All right, let's go ahead and get a weather brief before we file. So let's go ahead and touch briefing at the top. It'll retrieve a briefing for me. All right, temporary flight restriction for an ex-president of the United States, George Bush. Hello, sir. He's still there. If I touch convective segments down at the bottom, There are red and there are yellow. Red is active during our passing time. Yellow is active within an hour of our flight time. Green is active more than an hour away from our proposed flight time. But if you're like me and you sometimes run late, they could absolutely be active by the time you actually depart. Remember, if you touch the map, it gets bigger and you can zoom. Just touch briefing to go back. I always just drag it all the way up to the top and hit show raw text. It's easier for me to read. And all it says is just refer to the most recent forecast from the Storm Prediction Center for the synopsis and meteorological details. Now, if I touch the convective SIGMAT here, you notice that it's only active from 2015 Zulu to 2021 Zulu. No, that's when I'm flying by it. The time of the actual SIGMAT is totally different. So the time in yellow that says July 22nd, 2015 Zulu to July 22nd at 2021 Zulu, that's not the time of the SIGMAT. That's the time I'm flying by it if I leave on time. And again, I just go down to the raw text. It's just easier for me to read. If you look in the raw text, the first paragraph, the last line is where it is. And it says area thunderstorms moving little, tops above flight level 450 or 45,000. Those are pretty strong stuff. Let's look at the next one. Same thing, tops above 45,000, except these, if you look at the last line of the first paragraph, it says the area of thunderstorms is moving from 200 at 10 knots. Those are actually fairly slow thunderstorms. So let's touch synopsis. If I touch the map, a dashed orange line is a trough aloft. That's just a temperature inversion that holds in a little bit of water vapor. That brings in the fog, the smog that we typically in Southern California. Texas doesn't have it today, but we typically have an orange line with bubbles called a dry line that creates thunderstorms. Remember, highs and lows aren't. That's not a very strong high. That's not a very strong low. It's just the low in the top left. I'll put them next to each other. The low is lower than the high. So what I always tell people in public is, am I tall or short? Well, I'm 5'8". It just depends on who I'm standing next to, right? The strength of a high or low is how tight these gray bars are. So that's a little stronger. That's a little weaker. We see some precip on there. We see a cold front, which creates thunderstorms. We see a warm front. If we see a warm and a cold front holding each other in place, that's a stationary front. It doesn't look like anything real severe today. So I'm going to touch briefing. Go to METARs. Now, ForeFlight removed the METAR history button, which I love, but let's just look at Decatur right there at the top. On the 22nd at 1835 Zulu or 135 local, an automated station said the winds were 190 at 5 knots, 7 miles, scattered at 4,200, scattered at 4,700. The temperature was tree. The dew point was 2.1. The altimeter is 2.9er. Then it was an AO2 automated station, and here's how you really impress your examiners, folks. Do you see the T string at the end? This is a temperature and dew point to 0.1 or 1 decimal point. The temperature was not actually 33 and the dew point wasn't actually 21. Read the very last line of that with me. The temperature was 32.9er and the temperature was 21.2. Fun with examiners. All right, so let's scroll down, and Oklahoma City, 120 at 9, 10 miles, scattered 3,200. Temperature's 31, the dew point's 22. Okay. And Ardmore, our alternate, winds calm, 10 miles, scattered at 4,800. Temperature's 32, and the dew point's 23. With the altimeter of 2,999. All right, not a bad day. Let's go to cloud coverage. This is my favorite chart because it replaced the area forecast. If I'm in the top left and it says overcast at 3,500, tops at 16,000, and I lose all electrical power to my airplane. I have no radios or certified navigation. Instead of continuing along my route by dead reckoning and then beginning an instrument approach by dead reckoning an hour and a half later, I would probably just navigate to the west, where the scattered clouds at 7,000 would allow me to, with no radio, land at a non-towered airport just by overflying the runway at a 90-degree angle, 500 feet up, and entering left or right on 45. That is safer, I think, than dead reckoning for an hour and a half. But please remember, ForeFlight is absolutely usable as a navigation device if you declare a mayday. And if I've lost all electrical power to my plane and I have no other comm or navigation abilities, that is absolutely an emergency in IMC. You better believe I'm going to use ForeFlight, which is not only totally legal, but a really good example of aeronautical decision making. If I look at the surface winds, and wow, the wind barbs are back. So let's look over at the top left, and there's a light thunderstorm, a moderate thunderstorm, moderate thunderstorm, moderate thunderstorm, heavy thunderstorm. No, don't ever answer a weather question without looking at the legend. There's no such thing as light thunderstorms. Thunderstorms are equally bad. That's the number of thunderstorms predicted to be in that area. Light pink is isolated, red is scattered, and a maroon or dark red is numerous. So again, no such thing as light thunderstorms. That's just the number of thunderstorms forecast in that area. If I look at a little later, and who knew there would be thunderstorms in Texas on a hot, humid summer day? I'm shocked, I tell you, absolutely shocked. Let's look at the entire US. Now, I want to look in the top left. Both of the dark green and the light green are light rain showers. It's just the chances of them happening. But have you noticed in the top left now, there's isolated thunderstorms, reading left to right, light rain shower, numerous thunderstorms. Well, wait a minute. How come there's no thunderstorms in the middle? There absolutely may be. The word shower, as in rain shower, is a sign of convective activity. It just has a 29% or lower chance of forming thunderstorms. So please be careful when you read radar like a stoplight. Green doesn't always mean go. A large dark green area that's been forecast as a shower means there is a possibility of thunderstorms. It's just at least 1% lower than 30%. I don't know about that. If we look at the wind barbs in the top left, that is a wind from the southeast that is 15 knots, gusting to 25. If you look at the magenta area or the pink magenta area, don't worry, the legend is always on the bottom left. All right, let's look at the TAFs. Now, again, green doesn't mean VFR. Well, kind of does. Green means VFR conditions. It doesn't mean you can get in or out. Never make your decisions by simply looking at some color-coded METARs or TAFs. If an airport is overcast at 5,000 feet with a 35-knot gusting crosswind and freezing rain with visibility at 5 miles, it's gonna color code as a green VFR airport, because green and blue, pink, red, all the color codes that ForeFlight throws at y'all are based on ceiling and visibility, not whether it's safe to fly or not. So please be very careful with that. ForeFlight will highlight them and it shows you where the TAFs are. A TAF can be good for up to 32 hours now. It can be as short as 4 hours. And every time they add a line, it just means that's when they predict the wind will change. So if I look at the second from the bottom at Tinker, it says becoming from the 22nd day of the month today at 20 Zulu, which would be 3 p.m., until 4 p.m. They predict the winds will be 150 at 12, more than 7 miles visibility, showers in the vicinity, scattered at 2,000, broken at 3,000, and the altimeter setting of 292. If you look down at the very last line of Tinker, you'll see NSW, no significant weather. If you look at the very last half, Oklahoma City, 130 at 6, more than 6 miles, scattered at 35, and scattered at 25,000 is the line that we should be in if we leave on time. Some really cool new wind charts. This one is from above, so if you're a GPS satellite looking down on your airplane, you'll notice that we have a 17-knot wind. No, it's a 5-knot wind from the southeast. The temperature aloft at our cruise altitude is 17 degrees Celsius, and that's true most of the way down. If you're looking at the planet from the side, you'll notice we climb above terrain and then move over, and that shows the wind direction from your left, right, or nose. So if you look at flight level 60, where the blue line touches the top. So the first place the blue line touches 6,000, there's a 16-degree temperature with a slight quartering headwind from the right. And then as we move over to the right, it changes to a quartering tailwind from the right. So this is looking from the side, and the green at the bottom is the terrain that we're climbing over. Now I want to be really careful with that turbulence EDR. The problem with the turbulence EDR, it's a great tool. Everything about ForeFlight is great. Best thing on the planet. I remember I used to use something called paper charts, and let me tell you, this is better. But the turbulence EDR, light green to heavy dark brown maroon, is based on something called a medium-sized aircraft that is not clearly defined. Is my 206 a light aircraft or a medium aircraft? Well, we know what a heavy aircraft is, but does that make a TBM 850 medium? And then everything single engine GA piston light? We're not really clear, but just be careful of the turbulence and the chances of icing. Look at the winds aloft. And this is the old numerical view that we're used to. Pretty much a wind from the southeast all day long. Let's look at departure NOTAMs. Now, here's the really cool thing about if you only file and fly IFR. If you always use the obstacle departure procedure or the standard instrument departure, if these NOTAMs affect that, they'll show up in those NOTAMs. The only people that typically hit these obstructions are people that have an instrument rating trying to go VFR. So VFR is not your friend if you have an instrument rating. Why do I really recommend everybody with an instrument rating never fly VFR again? It's not that VFR is that dangerous, that's not true. But every time you go VFR, your instrument skills deteriorate. So if I'm going from Decatur Airport to Denton, a whole 6-8 minute flight, I get an IFR clearance before I leave, I shoot an IFR approach, and I land IFR. If I'm coming back to Decatur from my friends at Denton, I get an IFR clearance, I depart IFR, I shoot an instrument approach, and then I cancel IFR once I'm on the ground. The reason I don't typically cancel in the air, there's exceptions to everything, is because if you crash short of the runway, they don't know you're missing. But the biggest reason I always go IFR is just to keep my skills up. Y'all, I took 7 years of Spanish and remember none of it because I speak English every day. The hardest thing for most general aviation pilots to do is to keep their instrument skills up because you don't get paid to do it every day. I'm fortunate enough I do. I get paid to teach this stuff all over the world. So I'm really good at IFR. But that's my job. If you all have a different job, and I'm sure you do, at least most of you, my recommendation is to always go IFR because it keeps your skills up. May not meet legal currency requirements, but at least you're keeping your skills up. I always scroll all the way up. Let's look at my destination NOTAMs. There are some obstructions, and there are some changes to some standard instrument departures, some instrument approaches, some other instrument approaches. I'm going to go through quickly for the point of this video, but I have made all of these corrections to the instrument approach plates. If I look at Ardmore, there are some obstructions, there's construction, there's taxiway alpha between alpha 1 and 1-3 closed. Do I really make all of these changes? Yeah, totally do. If I go to airports and I pull up Alpha Delta Mike and I touch the taxiway, I really have marked up that closed taxiway. The biggest difference in this case between a professional pilot and an amateur is professional pilots spend way more time briefing and planning than usually they do flying. Let's go back to the weather briefing. Changes to the instrument approaches, which I've already made. Shocker, the buoy VOR is still out of service. Now, this is not really in alphabetical order, you notice. This is everything within 50 miles of your route as you go. That's how they come up with it. If we look at comm NOTAMs, the tower over FTW is closed at night. Service NOTAMs, if the tower at FTW is closed, it's no longer class Delta. Some AWAS ceilings over at Juliet Whiskey Yankee is out. And over at Page, which is Romeo Charlie Echo, the AWAS is not available. Airspace NOTAMs, not a big deal on airspace because I go IFR, but I just want to talk about those UAS. Those are drones, unmanned aerial systems. They can be predator drones. They're not necessarily the little fluffy Amazon things. And here's a little trivia for you. Who is the biggest operator of drones, including predator drones, no missiles, no guns on theirs, in the continental United States? It's actually the railroad, BNSF. They operate continuously a huge fleet of drones all over the United States. They are so advanced that they've built radio towers, and when they go into or near a non-towered airport, they actually talk on common traffic frequencies, advising pilots that they're there. They have transponders, and they can even have the ability to talk to ATC. So yay, railroads. Typically, they tend to stay a little low, but you can always assume that. The ones I'm really looking for, and again, I've gone through these multiple times, I'm looking for something called PJE, that's parachute jumping in effect, and you really want to be careful with those guys. If I look at en route, taxiway, runway, and apron NOTAMs, Bridgeport is NOTAMed that avgas is not available. This NOTAM has been out there for a couple of weeks, and almost every couple of days, somebody on Facebook will post, I landed at Bridgeport and the gas is not available. It is actually legally required under 91-103 that all pilots must get a standard weather briefing, including NOTAMs, before they leave the traffic pattern of their home airport. So when people post on Facebook that they didn't get a weather briefing, that's not always the greatest idea. Telling people the gas is out of service as a public service to tell other pilots is very useful. But if you're surprised that the fuel is out at Bridgeport, you didn't look at the standard weather briefing. Doesn't make you a bad pilot, but you may have been just become a little complacent. Okay, so here's other stuff at Denton. And again, I'm going to scroll through here very quickly. I've actually read this, and none of these actually affect the airports in our flight plan. And in an emergency, if we had to choose one of these airports, ATC would take care of us. Let's go en route other NOTAMs. This is just other stuff. Lots of obstructions. Again, going IFR certainly helps. Again, flying high certainly helps. and just lots of obstructions. And just make sure, even though I'm going very quickly for the purpose of this video, that you slow down and check them all out. Center NOTAMs. It says drones. So the top one is a Zenter, Fort Worth Zenter, KZ Zenter, so Fort Worth Center. Special notice, the FISB, that's the weather portion of ADS-B broadcast for Fort Worth, is adding 2 new FISB products: temporary restricted areas and temporary military operating areas. Yay, that's very cool. There are some avionics software upgrades that you need to do, but that is awesome. Here's another one. You're reducing the FISB look-ahead range to 5 nautical miles for special use airspace. Okay. There are some obstructions, a bunch of windmills. There's a new TFR near San Angelo. And what's really interesting is this one at San Angelo. I just want to take a second and read it to you. Any person who knowingly or willfully violates the rules concerning operation in this airspace may be subject to criminal penalties. So again, getting the weather briefing before you go is pretty important. Okay, so there's some gunfire, there's an RCO, bunch of stuff. You can actually make all of these changes on the top one. You can change Victor 289 on the ForeFlight map if you want. This one is important. People in Mexico are not legally obligated to tell the FAA when they build a radio tower. So why would they? We don't have to call, ICAO if we're going to build a radio tower in Texas. So it's just saying that the terrain and obstacle database when you go into Mexican airspace may not be 100% accurate. All right, all of these routes, they don't affect our flight, and I cover all this stuff in our video training in much more in depth. So based on that, that looks like a pretty good weather briefing, and we'll be okay to fly today. Okay, so now that I've briefed, now I can file. You never want to file then brief, because how do you know your alternates will work and everything? So now that I've gotten a weather brief, I can go ahead and file. So I'm going to, we've got departing Decatur, going to Oklahoma City, alternate of Ardmore, leaving in just a little bit. I filed Fidget.Tisdale3 with, the Ranger 360 radial up to Blico. And there are 57 people watching this video right now. Oh, I guess we're going to have to leave some of you home. Apparently my 206 will not fly at any altitude with 57 people in it. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to leave most of you behind, and I'll just fly alone. That'll be fine. Okay, I always fly with full fuel, if possible. Everything else looks great. AAR is where I'm going. You'll notice the little email symbol is grayed out. I'm going to put that right at the top. If they're just blue, you can actually email the FBO a fuel request, and when you land, they're already waiting for you. I'm going to go ahead and hit proceed to file. Confirm that I'm ICAO, that all my equipment is set up correctly. Everything looks good. And this is where I can add a second alternate airport. So my first alternate airport, I always put before my destination, a minimum of 50 miles, because if the weather's bad at my destination, I just stop before I fly into bad weather. The second alternate airport I'm going to put is I'm going to put something nearby in case Oklahoma City is actually closed because somebody geared up and blocked all 10 runways or whatever, in which case I'm going to put Wiley Post, which is KPWA. Okay. Everything else looks cool. I'm going to go ahead and file that. File now. It's going to file it. My flight plan's been filed. And fairly shortly, I should get an expected route and flight plan acknowledged. And guess what I got? My expected route was received, KLUD to Oklahoma City, exactly what I thought, Fuzz 360 radial to Blico. Now, remember, I'm not going to Fuzz. I'm going to intercept the Fuzz 360 radial to Blico. Don't ever hit update at this point, because if you update it, it will confuse the map, because there is no such thing as Fuzz 360. So since I already got what I planned on, I'm just going to hit cancel. And you'll notice down at the bottom right is an amend button. That amend button will go away 30 minutes before my estimated departure time. If I need to change the flight plan less than 30 minutes before I depart, I just have to file a second flight plan. And then when I call regional, I just tell them which flight plan. Which, by the way, how am I gonna get out of here being a non-towered airport? Well, it's pretty simple. At almost every airport in the United States now, if you simply go to airports, pick your departure airport, which would be Decatur, touch frequencies, then touch clearance, there is a direct dial phone number to the TRACON or center where you can now call and get a telephone clearance after your run-up is done and you're literally number one ready to depart. So that's why I always depart IFR, because I'm going with a telephone clearance before I take off. Okay, so since we know that I'm never going to the Fuzz VUR, I'm going to be told to intercept the Fuzz 360 radial to Blico. I need to activate that leg. So currently it's showing me going to Fuzz. Well, I'm never going to do that. So to activate the leg, I'm going to touch Navlog. I'm going to touch the arrow between Fuzz and Blico, and I'm going to put fly leg. This is exactly how I do vectors to final later in the program. Now, the other thing is I always want to overlay my emergency alternate, or what I call a takeoff alternate. Takeoff alternate is mostly used by the airlines, but it's something I learned many years ago. If I depart to the south of Decatur, it's probably easier to get into another airport quicker if I had an in-flight emergency. So since I'm going that way anyway, I'm going to overlay an emergency approach at Denton DTO. So if I have an emergency after takeoff, I'm going to divert to Denton. So I'm going to touch Denton Airport with my finger. I'm going to touch More next to the airport. I'm then going to touch Details. I'm going to scroll up from the bottom until I find Approach. And then I'm going to overlay the ILS 18 on top. The reason I would do an ILS, GPS is always better in my opinion, but what if I lose GPS signal right after takeoff? Well, I'd want to land at the nearest airport. I couldn't come back to Decatur because we don't have anything but GPS. Another good reason to use a takeoff alternate. So I'm going to touch map next to ILS or localizer 18. And as I depart, you'll notice I've already got that plate marked up. So the question is it legal to use ForeFlight only as your primary method of navigation on an instrument approach? When I say Mayday, 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 I can do anything I want. And having this on ForeFlight, all I have to do is disconnect my autopilot, hand fly towards that localizer, and then very quickly load it on my Avidyne. But this will get me to the ground quickly and safely. Remember, ForeFlight is absolutely legal in an emergency, which this would be. So if I needed to activate that quickly, I could certainly do so by simply changing it. But just overlaying the plate tells me everything I need to know. Okay, so let's talk about adding a custom en route hold. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, the only time I've done just a random, hey, can you hold en route thing is training. It doesn't really happen in real life, but it is nice to be able to mark up a custom hold in ForeFlight, especially just for situational awareness. So we've left Oklahoma City and we are flying southbound on the departure, approaching a waypoint called Muddy. And Fort Worth Center says, Stationer 4941 Foxtrot, I have a hold for traffic delays, advisory ready copy. I'm like, yeah, sure. What you want? And he says, hold west of Muddy, 4 nautical mile legs, left turns. No problem. So west of Muddy, if Muddy was a VOR, means my inbound leg would be on the 270 radial. So what I want to do is I want to create a custom waypoint west of Muddy so I can draw my inbound hold course. So all I'm going to do is, this is different in the newest edition of ForeFlight, but basically get over to custom content, create a user waypoint, and I'm going to add up at the top right, and I'm going to call it Mud West, meaning hold west of Muddy. And my latitude is the waypoint, Muddy / the 270 radial / 4 nautical miles, and hit save. And look, ta-da, a waypoint west of Muddy to draw my inbound course. Now all I gotta do is see that red line. I'm gonna grab my flight plan, drag it up to Mud West, and I'm gonna drag the flight plan back to Muddy. And I've now inserted my first inbound hold course. So the waypoint I've put in allows me to hold west of Muddy, 4 nautical miles. Now the left turns are not there. You're gonna have to kind of picture that in your mind, but let me show you what it looks like in real life. So I'm flying along and this looks like it's gonna have to be a parallel entry because the dashed pink lines is actually the hold with left turns. So coming up on Muddy, I'm gonna have to make a right turn and then another right turn to do a parallel entry. So I put in the custom hold in my Avidyne. I put nav on the 55X, and I sit back and let the computers make me look really good. And this is what it actually looks like in real life. So GPSS is really GPS rolls steering. There's an invisible R, and it rolls or cuts the corner before a waypoint, which makes it more stabilized versus the old nav mode, which would go past and correct back. So GPSS is really GPS roll steering, and it's rolling ahead of time. And you notice how ForeFlight says, yep, that's the inbound leg. Now, just for brevity, or to cut this video just a little bit shorter, I'm going to skip ahead and show you, yes, my autopilot has done a perfect parallel entry and is now back on the way to Muddy. Now at this point, ForeFlight, once I get to Muddy, is going to try and auto sequence southbound of Muddy down towards a waypoint called Font. So I'm going to open up the nav log and get ready to reactivate the leg Mud West to Muddy when it tries to auto sequence. So it'll auto sequence. The leg southbound will go pink. I'm going to scroll back up on my nav log and reactivate that leg. While my autopilot does a perfect hold. Again, going to skip ahead a little bit. You've noticed I've done a perfect hold along with the wind correction. And now ATC says after passing Muddy, resume own navigation, which would be to the waypoint Font. No problem. ForeFlight's going to auto sequence anyway. On Avidyne, I just push exit hold. And of course, on a Garmin GPS, you would just unsuspend. So now, when I get to muddy, the autopilot starts turning me under GPS steering, and ForeFlight, of course, will auto sequence southbound. All right, so I had the star, the fidget.tisdale3 all put in there. Unfortunately, Fort Worth Center said proceed direct Tisdale. When you go direct to a waypoint in a procedure, ForeFlight removes the procedure bar at the top, even though all the waypoints are there. The beauty of paying extra for the Jeppesen plates is I can still overlay a georeference plate. So all you have to do to get that done is just touch the airport, show plate, and scroll down, and they're in alphabetical order. So all of the arrivals and the stars are, all the stars and SIDS are all blended in. Just look for Tisdale 3 arrival. And look, there's the border, and you can see the georeference plate along with all my altitudes and all my notes overlaid in ForeFlight for me. Now I've checked the weather, and it looks like I'm going to switch to runway 17 right. So how do I add an instrument approach to this? No problem at all. All I'm going to do is up in the top right, I'm going to hit the procedure button. Approach, ILS 17 right, and always do an initial approach fix or the farthest point out. And in this case, it's going to be Philem. Even though I'm going to get vector to final because that's what the arrival says, you never want to load vectors to final, because if ATC changes their mind and needs you to do the procedure turn at Philem, or they need you to go to a different waypoint, you want to have that in the flight plan. You don't want to have to re-put stuff in. So on a Garmin GPS or an advanced flight management system like the Avidyne IFD or the Bendix King AeroNavs, you always load the full procedure and then you activate the leg to final. And I'd like you to do that in ForeFlight as well. So let's talk about that manual termination. You see how Isaki to Philem is now dashed? That is what's called a vector only or manual termination. You're not supposed to go direct to Philem from Isaki. You're supposed to track a GPS track of 356. They will vector you to final, but ForeFlight's a little confused because it's got phylum after the arrival. So you're not supposed to go direct there. You're supposed to do heading mode and accept a radar vector. But if they tell you to go direct to phylum, you can because it's already in there. But what you'll notice is the whole thing ends at Oklahoma City. The missed approach is actually missing. So as a professional pilot, I always assume I'm going missed. I want to manually add the missed approach hold. And it's a little unique here because it's climb to 2000, then a climbing right turn on a 311 heading to intercept a radial from the Wiley Post VOR hold to jet ski. So I'm just going to manually add all that. All I'm going to do is put the Wiley Post PWA VOR after Oklahoma City. And then I'm going to put jet ski. Now, I'm not supposed to go to the Wiley Post VOR. I'm just supposed to intercept that radial. So I'm going to grab right there and drag it to where the plate thinks I'm going to hit. And then I'm going to drag this to show the climbing right turn. Ta-da! I've added the missed approach hold. And you're not supposed to follow that exact track because it doesn't know when you're going to hit 2000 and when you're going to make the right turn to 311. But as you see, it's going to be pretty close just a little bit later. Now let's go back to the beginning. We've passed I believe it was called Isaki, and we're going to get vectors to final. Let's see what that looks like. So under navlog, I'm just going to find the final approach fix is the VE. So I'm going to find the leg from ROHA to VE, hit the middle arrow, and activate the leg or fly leg. And let's show you what that looks like in real life. So I'm flying along. I was on a 356 after Isaki. They've started turning me. And you'll notice even though I'm going to intercept between Philem and Roja, it's okay because the leg inbound from that is already ready to go. And you can just watch as ATC kind of turns me on to a 30-degree intercept like they always do. And they just say maintain 4,000 until established, cleared for the ILS 17 right, Oklahoma City. Now, after you pass Roja, you don't have to go down to 3,000. In fact, because they say cleared for the approach, if the glide path is above me at 4,000 outside Roja, just put your autopilot in approach mode and ride it on in. Now, let's say we did this and we went missed. This is a real world example. This is real in-flight footage of what the mist looks like. And you can see I'm not quite on that pink line, but I am flying parallel to it. And you can watch ForeFlight as my Avidyne and S-Tech autopilot gets close to that radial, it'll start turning inbound, and then ForeFlight will auto-activate the 216 radial down to jet ski. If you look in the bottom left, the jet ski blue triangle on ForeFlight doesn't match the jet ski waypoint on the JEP chart because the JEP chart is just saying jet ski is off the chart. That little part of the window is not to scale. But where the blue triangle from ForeFlight is, truly is where jet ski is. So watch what happens as I get closer to that 216 radial off Wiley Post. There's my autopilot starting the GPS steering turn or GPS roll steering. And as soon as I pass that custom waypoint that I dragged in, just that latitude, longitude dot, you'll watch ForeFlight just continue to auto sequence. So while it takes its time, because my 206 was a little slow that day, Mark Watts had a question. Once you mark up instrument approach plates, you can save it. Once you mark them up, they stay there forever unless the instrument approach chart actually changes. So you'll know you've got a new instrument approach chart if your markups have gone away. And you can see it auto-sequenced. David Boyle's got a question on the hold west of Muddy. So he says hold west of Muddy, that the instruction requires an inbound leg of 270. No, sir. Holding west of Muddy means the inbound leg is west of Muddy on the 270 radial, so your inbound course is actually 090. So it was set up correctly, but great question. Okay, so the greatest thing about ForeFlight is once I'm holding down here at jet ski is I can decide if I want to do a different instrument approach because now the winds favor runway 13. Well, you can't change the procedure on a Garmin GPS. You can't change the procedure on an Avidyne flight management system while you're holding because you would lose the hold. You always want to use ForeFlight to preview and pick where you want to start. So people ask me all the time, if I have a G1000 or an Avidyne all-glass airplane, why do I need ForeFlight? Because you can use ForeFlight for big picture situational awareness without changing the navigation system. So if I simply touch the plate, and you can see me holding, and I change the plate on ForeFlight, I'm not changing the procedure in my navigation system. I'm just changing the ForeFlight plate to the RNAV 13. I could start at Laramie, I could start at Wabbit, or I could start at Yavkey. Now, Laramie would make a lot more sense, but for training purposes, I want to do Yavkey. So I'm just going to type it in. And I think I misspelled it. Zoom out a little bit. Yep, it's YUVCI. And then on a Garmin GPS system, I would actually add Yavkey to the flight plan after the hold. On the Avidine, I would actually add Yavkey, KOKC, and load the whole procedure. One of the coolest things about Avidine is you can have the same airport in the flight plan with different approaches multiple times. On Garmin, just add the Yavkey. So when I'm cleared to Yavkey, I can simply activate the approach. So all I have to do is, as I'm holding, say, hey, Oak City, when able, I'd like direct Yavkey for the RNAV 13 with ATIS kilo or whatever, starting at Yavkey. Okay, so all I have to do is wait for him to say direct Yavkey. When he does, now I touch procedure. Now I do Yavkey. I get rid of the stuff off the old mist, touch Yavkey and hit direct 2. And then I activate the new procedure either in the Avidine, or I can now change the procedure in Garmin. And then I can just drag my little blue line for the mist to get that climbing right turn again. So I'm all ready to go mist if I need to. So if there's a published procedure turn at an initial approach fix or an intermediate fix, it's always required unless you get permission to go straight in. So why isn't ForeFlight showing the procedure turn at Yavkey? Because it's not a procedure turn. There's a flyable course from IF, Kingfisher, Terse, and Laramie, and we know they're flyable courses because there's a big altitude, a DME distance, and a magnetic reference bearing. So for example, from Terse in the top right, it's a 186, 5.3 distance, 4,000 feet. If you look at the hold in pink, it's not shown the same way. It's a 4-mile leg and the whole hold is at 4,000 and the inbound course is 131, but it's not shown the same format and it's not as thick a line. That is not a procedure turn. That is one of the very rare en route holds for traffic delays and weather. So unless they tell you to hold at Yavkey as published, you would never do it. So let's see what it looks like when you're shooting an approach with, I don't know, a 49 knot crosswind and moderate turbulence. And this is what's on my training videos. This is all real world stuff. This is not in a sim. This is what it looks like in real life. And this is a live screen recording from ForeFlight. And it'll tell me, hey, there's 500 feet. Remember, the 500 AGL has nothing to do with an instrument approach. It's just a GPS above ground. So I'm supposed to level off at 1800, and I have, but remember the ground speed is not indicated airspeed, and the GPS altitude is not an indicated baro-corrected altitude. But you can see the moderate turbulence is really pushing my port student around. Now it's real important to level off at 1800 and fly forward to the missed approach point on an LP. LPV has decision altitude, LP has an MDA. But the most common mistake students make is at the missed is they go full power, full prop, full mixture. They just forget the climb. So make sure full prop, full power, full mixture now, and get that nose up. There we go. Gary reminded, get the nose up. And that is actually a really common mistake with instrument pilots is they forget everything or they do everything perfectly. They just don't get the nose up for the climb. And you can see that wind is really pushing us around. So in my 3-day training courses, yeah, we're going to go out and fly with 50-knot crosswinds. We're not going to land with a 50-knot crosswind. We're going to go, gee, this isn't working out. And let's beat feet back to Ardmore and do an LP runway 13 with a circle to land. Now I want to talk about the terrain as this movie plays. You can see the terrain is yellow. A lot of people think, oh, that means you're 1,000 feet above. No, yellow terrain and yellow obstacles mean you're at least 100 feet above the terrain or the obstacles. It doesn't mean you're safe. And this is why I really, really tell everybody, I don't do circle land approaches in actual IMC. There's not any little bit of flying traffic pattern at 500 feet AGL with 1 mile visibility at night with low clouds that seems like a reasonably good idea to me. Look, I was a paid charter captain. I did circle to land approaches with a 2-pilot crew. I'm not doing it because I don't have to be there. I could have just gone to an alternate or stopped before I even took off. But I do circle to land for training in day VMC conditions because I want students to see how low you really are. So we're on a 3-mile final to runway 13, and of course you would hear the audio alert if you were listening to the uh, uh, audio panel that's hooked up to Bluetooth, or if you have Bluetooth hooked up to your headphones, either way works. And you can see how that wind is really still pushing us in. And we're back at 500 AGL again because the terrain drops as we get a little closer. You can actually see the contouring. So it is possible to hit a 500 AGL more than once. All right, getting close. And look how that circle takes you right over those obstructions. This is why I don't want people to do circle to land in actual IMC. My recommendation, it's my opinion only, if you can't do straight in, I don't recommend doing it. And like I do this for a living and I wouldn't do it because you don't ever have to be there. Decision fatigue absolutely will get you into get there-itis, which gets you into trouble. And you can see when we circle how jerky the GPS is just because of how rough the winds are. Even landing runway 17 at Ardmore, they were still about 25 knots straight down the runway. So you can watch us turn and see how the GPS is kind of jerky. That's just the wind buffet. That's just light to moderate chop with a little bit of wind shear. And because of the winds, we actually have to point a little left of the runway. Okay, if you'd like to be really great at ForeFlight, just not know a couple of the basic buttons, don't forget to read the almost 700 pages of owner's manual. Or if you're not crazy about the 700 pages of reading, I do know a guy that actually sells 14 hours of video training, and this is actually showing an emergency approach to LAX, and that would be me. If you'd like to be great at single pilot IFR in your airplane with your avionics, your autopilot, and you better believe ForeFlight, this is what I do for a living. I'd be happy to join you in your airplane anywhere in the world. It's a very intense 3 days. And let me tell you, after over 20 hours of training in 3 days, I will, the very last procedure, turn off all of your electronics and make you land the plane using ForeFlight only as a simulated emergency. If you bring your airplane to North Texas here in Decatur, you get a discount and you learn more. Why would you learn more here than if I come to you? You get away from distractions. But I really will come anywhere in the world. It's my full-time job. If you'd like to learn more about me and pilotsafety.org, we have a Facebook page. It's just pilotsafety.org. Real easy to figure out. You can also just go to our website, pilotsafety.org. And if you do go to our website of pilotsafety.org, I have a very special coupon. Book. Then you just click on ForeFlight. And for the week of the virtual Oshkosh, I have a special deal. $75 off our new online mastery training. All you have to do is use the coupon code OSH, O-S-H. It is rapidly exceeding 14 hours, and the best part about this is it's an online program that never stops growing. Old outdated material gets removed, new updates get added, and it's all real world, real in-flight footage with detailed pro tips. So if you want to know all of the features of the best iPad program out there, go on over to pilotsafety.org, click on ForeFlight Online Mastery Training, and make sure you use the coupon OSH to save $75 off our video training programs. Now, we also have video training on Avidyne, Bendix King, Garmin, and mastering single pilot IFR. I'm going to take a few minutes and answer a few questions before I log off. So Scott's got a great question. Scott Wiederhold, I hope I got that right. In ForeFlight, when I file an IFR flight plan and they come back with an expected route, if clearance delivery clears me as filed, then what do I fly? What you filed, which is why I never update to the expected route. So the expected route that comes back so quickly is a reflex action from computers. A controller might have never seen that. That's why I never update to the expected route until it matches my clearance. Now, Scott, if you're not sure, just ask. Hey, just to make sure, I filed Ardmore Direct WeSat. Is that what you show? And ATC will be happy to clarify that for you, but that's a great question. Thanks, Scott. Rod, is there a recording of this good stuff? Absolutely, Rod. You'll get an email within an hour or two of the ending of this with a link to a recorded video. Please share it with everybody. Louise, how you doing? The ForeFlight display simulated electrical failure to the panel is what sold ForeFlight for me during the mastery training. Yep, because Louise actually did a 3-day program with me. And yep, I absolutely killed her toys. She's got a really great airplane, and I turned off everything except ForeFlight. So she did a great job. Y'all did great. Thanks so much for joining me. I have to be up early. I have to go get a Malibu to go pick up a Meridian to come back. I don't know. I'm going to be in like 3 states tomorrow. If you see me out in public, look for a guy in a pink polo, come up and say hi. Thank you all again for your time and being part of the Gary Pink team, or what we call the Mastery Not Minimums pilotsafety.org team. Thank you all, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks again.